things have changed, and I feel like we should talk about that. Hi, my name is Andy, and if you don't know me, just over a year ago, I started writing my first fantasy novel, which is the first installment in a trilogy called House of Aphdos. And this was my first endeavor, writing a book. I have since finished the first and second draft of said novel, and am currently in the draft 3 version of this project, trying to get it a little bit closer towards self-publication, which is my ultimate goal. But a lot has changed since I started this project, and I want to talk about why that's important. I want to talk about what shifted and where I see this project going from here on out. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first thing I want to acknowledge is that most beginner writers, myself included, have this idea in their head that a perfect first draft exists. In fact, you might spend a lot of time in your first attempts to write a book or even a short story of sorts, writing the perfect first chapter, opening scene, doing line level edits like it is your job from the get-go. And you might find that this is absolutely the worst formula for progress. I felt like I spent, 10 years trying to write stories perfect the first time and feeling like if a scene or a chapter was not perfect, I could not move on from it. And that got me about nowhere. I never got farther than chapter 5 or 10 in a project, and the story never got into probably even Act 2. So when I sat down to write House of Aphdos, I had recently heard some advice that the best way to get your first draft of a book or a story or a script or whatever it is that you're trying to create down is to just keep moving. So I gave it a try. I thought maybe not everything will be perfect, maybe the world building won't be complete, but I'm going to keep writing and just see where it gets me. And it got me to a completed first draft that landed just under 80,000 words, and I felt pretty good about that. Actually, I felt great about it. That was really exciting for me. I had never gotten that far, ever. And as you can imagine, never having finished a project, I had also never revised a project. So over the last 7 or 8 months, I've been in the process of fixing everything that wasn't right the first time I wrote the story. But something you should know if you have not completed your first story is that sometimes you won't even know something was incorrect when you wrote it. Sometimes you don't know it needs to be fixed until you're later on in the project and you have the hindsight to be able to see those things. So that was one thing that changed, is my ability to find flaw within story and correct it, to find things that feel accurate and better and improved. So yeah, change is inevitable as you start to go through the revision process and you go from drafting to revision, because they're very different parts of storytelling and they're very different skills. And so I think one thing I have always kind of been decent at is beginnings and stories and ideas. And so while that's related to drafting, I was never so good at the follow through of it. So that was a big learning curve. But then on the other side of that, revision felt like a very unknown, scary territory that I was honestly afraid to dip my toe into. But here I am now, quite a ways into the revision process and gaining a lot of confidence. A lot has changed about this story as I've continued to work on it. Characters have shifted, motivations have shifted, settings have evolved, and plot issues have become more expanded throughout the world. And that has been complicated, yes, in many ways, but it's also been so worth it. I think something that authors can either find fear in or comfort in, depending on your style of writing, is change. Sometimes changing things feels really terrifying and like you're unsure if it's the right choice, or you're afraid that if you change it to be one way, you won't be able to get it back to what it was if you decide you don't like that revision or whatever it is. And in the other sense, change can also be comforting. You can know that nothing has to stay the way it is when you first write it. I think change was comforting for me when I started actually drafting with a mindset of persistence rather than a mindset of perfection. Knowing that I could go back in revision and change the things that were not up to my standard or evolve them to be better felt comforting and gave me the, empowered motivation to keep moving forward. Which was really great. And I think it's a valuable lesson for all writers to learn if they don't already know it. But at the same time, now we're coming back to a point where change is getting a little bit scary again. I'm in the revision trenches and trying to face what it looks like to make changes at a point where a lot of the developmental edits have already been done to the story. So my changes feel a little bit more minor. It's details I'm putting in here, there. It's character detail. It's setting description. It's the way sentences are flowing or dialogue is being described. It's all these things. And while I thought this is the part I would feel most confident making changes in, I've really had a hard time identifying if my writing is stronger in form A or form B. And I think that's where the power of beta readers and outside opinions can come in. When you spend so much time on a project, it can be really hard to see where it was versus where it is now. I think we lose sight sometimes in clarity over improvements, and that's where a second or third opinion can be so valuable. Another thing that's really changed for me as I've been working on this project is the clarity I have of the world and my main character Emery's journey throughout it. If you're unfamiliar with my channel or anything about my story is a new adult fantasy about a girl named Emery Aftos who takes an age-old war into her own hands by defying her father's wishes and crossing enemy lines as an undercover assassin. But when she's across enemy lines, she of course finds out things that might shake everything she thought she knew about her life, love, and the legacy that she's leaving behind. So that's what my story is about. And I knew that going into this. I think while that synopsis may not have been so perfectly worded, not that it's perfect, but while it may not have been so clearly worded when I started this project, I knew internally the destination that Emery needed to get to in the story. I knew the conflict I wanted her to wrestle with and the relationships that were going to be strained in her life and the ones that were going to be her salvation. That being said, there is so much clarity I have gained on why Emery is who she is, why she makes the choices that she makes, and where that's going to get her in the long run as I've drafted and revised this story. Revision has been such a powerful process to really put myself into the House of Aftos and into the war that they're in and what all the dynamic pieces at play are within that. And I didn't know that in the beginning. And if I had reserved myself from change or tried to perfect it in the first draft, I never would have the clarity or understanding of the world that I do now. And honestly, the story would be worse off for it. I think sometimes, whether intentional or not, writers have a tendency, myself included, to white knuckle the things that we love about our work. So when you come up with a certain storyline idea, a concept for a setting or a character or a dilemma that they face, sometimes we white knuckle those things in revision because we love them so deeply for what the idea originally was. And we fear that changing and evolving that idea might weaken what we originally fell in love with about it. But I think really the freedom of creativity is the freedom to grow within your ideas and to let them mold into something new and let your artistry and your skill that's always going to be growing impact the way that your stories and your characters interact with the world around them. And I know that sounds so corny and cheesy, but these are just the things I feel like I've continued to learn about writing as I've been on this journey of writing my first book. And I fully expect and hope that this is the worst book I'll ever write. If I am not a better writer in 20 years than I am right now, and hopefully I'm, 8 to 10 books down the road at that point, I will be really disappointed in myself. I hope that I continue to change. I hope the worlds I craft continue to get better and more complex and more rich for readers to sink their teeth into. I hope my characters continue to battle with things that my audience can understand. And that concept, that idea of pushing myself within this craft is so exciting to me. And I can't wait to let myself change as I go through this as an artist, because I already have so much, whether I tried to or not. I think deeply investing yourself in any project like this for a period of time that's long like this is bound to see you change as a person. I read in a book once about writing that something so beautiful when you work on a project for a long time is that you have a million different versions of yourself that sit down to touch that project. Or if you work on a project for a year, 365 versions of you, if you do it every day, sit down and touch this project. And who you are 3 months ago versus who you are today might be different. And what a problem that you couldn't solve 3 months ago in your work is something that you 3 months from now might have the perfect solution for. And I think that's really cool. So allow yourself to change as you're working on your projects. I know I have, and my project is better off for it. So what else is changing between draft 2 and draft 3 in House of Aftos? I'm glad you asked. I think draft 2 was really heavy lifting edits. I was shifting a lot of things around. I've shared this a couple times on my channel, but I'll say it again in case there's a newbie here. I originally wrote this story in 2 points of view, one of them being first person present narrative and the other being third person past. Why did I do that? I don't know. I think I had a gut feeling from the beginning that was probably not the way I would publish the book. But this is a dual POV novel with a male and female love interests, and it kind of bounces back and forth between the two of them. And for some reason, when I sat down to write this book, the male main character's voice just came out in third person past tense. And instead of trying to white knuckle myself into writing it in first person present, I just let myself explore the character in that narrative because that was what felt natural at the time. Once I finished drafting the novel, I knew that was a big change I was going to have to make, and I wrestled for a moment about if it would be worth it. And I realized that there was a whole list of changes that I had gut intuition about that probably should be changed. And part of me wanted to shy away from them because of the amount of work that it would be. But I knew that making those changes to the project was ultimately going to make it way more enjoyable for the reader, and I was going to feel way more proud of myself at the end of this. So I went through in every chapter that the male POV was in place, and I changed it to first person present. And I felt like his voice came through so much stronger because I got to know him in that third person past the first time. I think I was so plugged into Emery's story and her narrative and what this story would be through her eyes that writing the second point of view in a more distant voice made it easier for me to constantly be in my main character's head, if that makes sense. I'm not sure that it does, but that's my theory, is that's why my brain did it that way. And then the second time around, I knew Emery's story better. So being able to plug into my male POV's voice in more of a first person way was way easier. And I actually felt like I got to know him incredibly better during the second draft. There was so much about who I knew I wanted him to be and what I wanted their relationship to be like when drafting this novel initially. But I don't think I got it right the first time. In fact, I know that I didn't. There was so much about who he is and the complexities of his family dynamics and the relationships in his life and why he is this way emotionally and why he asks these questions and not these ones and sees the world this way but not that way. All those things became so much clearer to me. It was almost like I got to hyper-focus on Emery in the first draft and hyper-focus on him in the second one. So I loved that. That was a great experience and a great change for me. So that was one of the major changes between draft 1 and draft 2. And then I also got to really strengthen some scenes, add further description to the setting, and add a lot to part 3 of the book. I definitely underwrote part 3 when I first drafted this book. So those were some of the heavy lifting elements that happened from draft 1 to draft 2. And I feel like summing them up that quickly makes it sound like it was not that much heavy lifting to do, but it took me 7 months. So believe me, it took some time. Draft 2 to draft 3, I think I had a moment towards starting draft 3 where I wondered, what the heck am I supposed to do in this draft? So much in draft 2 felt clear. Like I could make a change and know right away if it was the right or wrong one to make for the story. And now I'm in draft 3 where I'm, looking at things more like dialogue and detailed setting and all these different little emotions that are in the internal, what the heck is that called? The internalization of Emery's thoughts, or whatever the heck you call that, whatever. Y'all know I'm still learning. I think I'm looking at these detail-oriented things and trying to make the book better on a line level of edits. And also, I'm trying to strengthen it in terms of cohesiveness. I want to make sure that if Emery feels one way in chapter 3 and nothing major has happened to change that by chapter 5, she still needs to be conveying that same feeling in chapter 5. So that has been some of my main focuses, and I think those are the things that are a little bit harder to nitpick about because things start to fall in more of an opinion realm as you get to later edits in the book. And not to say that developmental edits can't have different opinions on them, but in general, there are a lot of great resources you can use to strengthen story structure and a lot of crutches to lean on as you go through those edits. Not that there's not that for prose and all the other things I've already listed a million times, so I won't list again. But I do think, in my experience or thought, there's a little more room for debate within it. So I guess all that to say, there are some changes coming in draft 3 that I'm really excited about. And there will be changes that happen between draft 3 and draft 4 once I have beta reader feedback and get some of those other opinions. But my biggest goal right now is getting this story to a point where I feel confident in what I know is supposed to be the story. So that way, when I get feedback from beta readers, I'm able to take that with a grain of salt, see the improvements that are being suggested, affirm the ones that I believe will strengthen the story, and move in another direction if I don't think they will. But that's where I'm headed. Those are the changes yet to come, and I'm really excited for it. All that to be said, I hope you enjoyed this chatty explanation of why this project has changed, why it's going to continue to change, and why I'm okay with that. But I would encourage you today to not hold on to things being the way they are out of fear. Lean into your creativity, lean into your expression, lean into the growth that you're experiencing as a person, and let it infiltrate your work, because we're all going to be better for it, and I can't wait to see what you put into the world. Thanks so much for watching this, guys, and if you want to support my channel or me as I power through revision, my Ko-fi link is below, and I'd love a virtual coffee. I love you all. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!